Welcome back, everybody, to the A to Z of property strategies with the professors of property, the phenomenal, awesome DJ David Clouter and myself, Andrew Roberts. David, we were doing the P's last time. Are we still on P's?
Amazingly, it'll be a while before we get there's a Q to get to Q because we've got a lot more P's in it. If you can make sense of that.
So where might we be up to?
We've landed on a P for property cycles.
We did a video during a lockdown on the pandemic, the COVID pandemic. I'll drop a link up here to that video where you explained how a pandemic affects the property cycle. So that's great. And you did a phenomenal talk at the Great Property Meet too, about a year earlier. So, where are we at?
That's a good question, isn't it? And first of all, what are property cycles? Well, there's a long-term trend line, and let me try and work this out. Yeah, it's like that. And the price of property over time kind of goes up in that way. In the short term, it bounces all over the place, and so it overshoots and undershoots. So that happens. That's a phenomenon. It was discovered more than 100 years ago by a guy called Homer Hoyt, who studied land prices in Chicago, and he proved that it is a thing. It's not always 18 years. Sometimes it's a bit less. Sometimes it's a bit more. But basically, what happens, I guess, is that prices shoot up a bit too quickly, and then there's a correction. That's probably a good way to look at it. And the shooting up part is the slow part. So if we were looking at, for example, 18 years, it would be likely 16 and a half of those would be going up, and then like 18 months is going down, where people think, oh my God, it's the end of the world, and let me off, and stop the world and let me off. And then it starts again, and then people think, you know what, it wasn't so bad, and the whole thing kind of repeats. Apropos, and these things are caused by different things as well. I mean, here in the UK, for example, I am old enough to remember the 1989 or 1990 property crash, which was caused by two things. It was caused by, first of all, the then Chancellor of the Exchequer, Nigella Lawson's dad, who had the unusually, remarkably different name from her of Nigel Lawson, imaginative family, and he stopped a particular type of relief that there was on property. It was called Miras. He bisected it, actually. He reduced this relief, a bit like the stamp duty thing that we've seen actually twice in recent years, and that had an effect on the market. It had a race. People raced to complete before a deadline, and then having got it over the line, they thought, and then interest in property stopped, and prices fell as a result. And then there was Black Monday, which you may remember, where George Soros took a bet against sterling and won, and the combined effect of those two was that we had a pretty flat property market in the area of London where I was investing and elsewhere for nearly a decade. And that was an extraordinary property cycle, and that was the first one that I really appreciated. And then, of course, we had those events of 2007 to 9, the so-called credit crunch. So these things have different causes. And then we've had a kind of mini one now with the pandemic, where suddenly, and this is still going on at the time of recording this video, but everybody's locked down for a while, and so restrictions are eased, and everybody's jumping around in the sunshine, and they go, let's buy a house. So everybody piles into the estate agents to do that, and then when they've done this, and it doesn't take very long, so a month or two later they think, coming up is the end of bounce back loans, coming up is the end of furlough, there'll be redundancies, and then the banks get onto that thought as well, and then the whole thing goes down again. So we've seen 18 years compressed into about 3 or 4 months at the time of recording this. So the cycles don't always take 18 years, and they're almost never caused by the same thing. But they do play out in a similar sort of way, in that things kind of crash down emotionally. People get very emotional about it, and they start dumping properties when there's no real reason to, and the fundamentals work, and so forth. And then after a while, they think, kind of like a roller coaster at the fairground, and then it starts to go up again.
I remember that property cycle in the 80s. I mean, in the 90s, it caused there to be a significant amount of negative equity and a massive spike in repossessions. It was the largest, I think it was the all-time largest amount of repossessions that ever went through, because as the market climbed in the 80s, people were paying a ridiculous sum of money, and I know people who 10 years later were still in negative equity because they'd overpaid that much and the market hadn't teetered, because like you said, it pretty much flatlined for around 10 years. So, yeah.
And some places have taken a terribly long time to recover from 2007, because I don't know the current situation, but certainly as of a year or two back, Belfast had gone down. I think it was 46% in 2007. I don't think they've even reached that. I could be wrong, but I don't think they've even reached that level yet to this day. So
Yeah.
sometimes, and so it's important to remember that different markets are hit differently from others.
You're so right. I mean, I know the Northern Ireland marketplace. I was over there 2 years ago and I was looking at the prices, and they still hadn't got back to their pre-crash figures, or pre the last crash figures, or even the figures of prior to that. Anyhow, is there anything we should look out for in a property cycle? Any clues that give us stuff? I mean, somebody had said to me before, baked beans or something gives a clue to a property cycle.
Oh, baked beans are absolutely terrific. I mean, where would we be without them? And they're also every slimmer's panacea, because you can eat lots of them and you won't put on a lot of weight. But yes, I mean, baked beans basically illustrate the way in which property as an investment class will always allow you to eat the same number, assuming that you are then getting rental income from these. As the rent goes up and the price of beans goes up, you'll always be able to buy the same number of beans at the shop every year for the whole of your life, which is a wonderful thing. The same applies to other classes of shopping as well, and other sort of day-to-day expenditures that you have. So it means that basically, because of the long-term growth and the sort of bouncing around a bit in the short term that you get from property investments, that you have in some way inflation-proofed your savings, which if you leave them in the bank, obviously the purchasing power, if I had a pound in my little piggy bank in, I don't know, 1961 or something, it wouldn't buy anything now, whereas back then it might have bought a week's shopping. I mean, I don't know, I'm exaggerating slightly, but now a pound wouldn't buy you a stamp, barely.
Well, it sounds to me like we've got some jumping beans there, and beans definitely means Heinz, so beans means Heinz.
Well, and there you go. And in the interest of fairness and their solicitors, of the other ones, other brands of bean are available, but Heinz are the best.
Absolutely.
Now, next on our little list there is a thing that is related to this, actually, because I'm now going to contradict everything I just said. And this is something we alluded to in the last video when we were talking about portfolio building. And this is pound cost averaging.
Okay, so talk me through pound cost averaging, David.
Well, this is a term that I first discovered the American version of it, which is dollar cost averaging, but it's the same thing really. And this is customarily used on the markets, really, where let's suppose we're buying shares in Sainsbury's, other supermarkets are available, and for a whole year,
Tesco's, Aldi, Morrison's, Lidl,
Asda. Poundland, they're not a supermarket. Anyway, we digress. Suppose you want shares in this particular supermarket group, and every month you ring the broker, or probably do it automatically nowadays, and you buy 50 shares in Sainsbury's. Now, at the end of the year, then, for 12 months, we bought 50 shares in Sainsbury's. So how many shares in Sainsbury's have we got, Andrew?
If you bought 50... Sorry, I missed that.
600. It's 50 times 12. We got 600, didn't we, Tom? Put you on the spot there. And what are we paid for it? We have paid the average price. So on some of those blocks of 50 shares, we paid a bit too much. On some of those, we've paid a bit too little, which we're quite happy about, but it's kind of averaged out. And because we weren't really certain with the fluctuating, and share prices fluctuate far more than house prices, in that they might go right down. And so it's been quite a safe way to get our... another supermarket group there. A good way to get our acquisition. Now, if we consider this in terms of property. There's one very well-known property guru who told me in private, so I'm not going to give you his name, that his plan is to buy one HMO a year for 40 years. And I think he's about halfway through that process now. And so on that basis, he hasn't had to worry really about the prices going up and down. He's buying into that for income. He's looking for a sort of retirement income. So every year his income goes up by the equivalent of one HMO's profit per year. So it's a bit like, in that sense, putting your money into a pension pot and seeing the value accrue.
Okay, that's quite smart, really, and it's the same way as buying shares and buying them piecemeal over a period of time, or investing in various save as you go type schemes. So a nice nifty little one. And I'd just say pound cost averaging isn't the same as dollar cost averaging, because we're using pounds and they're using dollars.
Good point. Good point. Indeed. Well, what do you know?
So where do we go from pound cost averaging today, David?
Next on the list, we've got a little portfolio hangover from last time, because we talked about portfolio building last time. We didn't talk about portfolio fine-tuning. When you've got this portfolio, and maybe you're in a phase in the property cycle, do you see what I'm doing here? Where you might not want to do some acquisitions right away. The ways in which you can make your existing assets work harder. Some people call it sweating the assets, don't they? And we'll probably include that as an S and say the same thing in a couple of weeks' time. Now, with portfolio fine-tuning, first of all, the big picture, you can, being a fan of spreadsheets and all this kind of thing, put all your properties into a spreadsheet and let's look at the yields and let's look at the performance. And then let's think about, let's say, the bottom 5 or 10%. And let's start with those. Now, it may be, and in technical terms, I think we call them the dogs. It may be that these are not working hard at all, and that really anything you do isn't going to make too much difference. That might be because of their location, they're right next to a sort of pub where there are fights every Friday night or something like this. It might be due to the type of property, in that you've got a 17-room house where there's no new HMOs allowed, and the main local market's for studio flats or something, and there's no possibility to convert it or whatever. It's the wrong property in the wrong location, and under such circumstances, you might consider putting those on the market. There might be a gain you can crystallise, or even if there isn't, it might be a kind of stop-loss strategy where that money could be working harder if deployed elsewhere. So that's kind of brute force property fine-tuning. Then you've got the ones at the top. There's probably not too much, it's worth having a look, but there might not be too much you can do with them, because we assume that they've been fine-tuned before and that everything is working perfectly in those, which leads us to the ones in the middle. And what can we do with those? And this is the more sort of hands-on part, if you like, of the property fine-tuning. And on these, on an individual basis, we look at all the outgoings on these properties, all the overheads, one by one, and we see what we can do about it. I mean, is it just a question? Well, it's a question of looking at all of them. So for instance, when's the last time you looked at the insurance policy and got quotes on it? Just a sort of ballpark type thing, and looking at all the various things. Is the property energy efficient? If not, does that make it harder to let out? Just going through every single item really on a check. Have a checklist of about 10 or 20 items and work through these to see if either there are existing expenditures. So, for example, if you've got an HMO, is the property energy efficient, or are all those heating bills just going through roofs and walls and this kind of thing, where you're paying that particular bill? Are there things which are, again, for example, have you got solar panels on the roof? You need to look at the payback time. Could they feed into, and that would work with a single load as well, can they feed back into the grid so that that starts cash flowing in a positive way for you? So many things that can be done to and we are, fine tuning like you might fine tune a car at the racetrack or something like this. We're trying to make those properties work a bit harder. If you've got a property, for example, with a detached garage, which is sufficiently large, could you turn that detached garage and do a title split and everything? Could you turn it into a small standalone studio with the necessary permissions? And what would be the possibility for letting the two properties out separately? I would venture to suggest that, you know, with your average property, you might get a £500 or £600 a month uplift on that just from a simple thing that might cost you a few grand. So many kind of creative ways in which you can look at what you've got and make it work harder.
Well, I think I would agree with you, and there's a couple of things I'd probably add in there. I mean, you said look at all of the costs. Now, you mentioned heating. I've got a good friend, Anthony Cherry, who runs a company called Timerstat. You might have seen these devices. They're specifically designed for HMOs and for serviced accommodation. And it will slash 30% off your heating bills. I've put them into properties and they're phenomenal. They really have slashed the heating bills. Now, Anthony has very kindly shared with me a 10% discount code that you can get 10% off if you buy them. And I'll drop that in the comments below. Niall will probably put a link on screen here for you as well. But one of the things worth looking at, I mean, what you can do, as well as performance monitoring your own portfolio, is take the weighted average of all of your properties, and I tend to use square feet and do all my ratios on per square foot, so I can not just look at is this one more energy efficient or less, but compare it on energy per square foot of the property. If you get an average across, say you've got 10 properties in your portfolio, David, I'm running an average energy cost of £1 a square foot. What's your average energy cost? I'm not sharing anything confidential on any one single property, but then David might tell me that his is more or less, and then we can have a look to see what he's doing to improve my portfolio. It's a great way of benchmarking against other landlords.
That's an excellent idea, and one that is new to me, and I think it's a fabulous idea. I'm going to get the old calculator out tonight and we'll work out some metrics because I think it's perfect.
Yeah, it's really worth benchmarking against other landlords. Just your average costs on various things. But another little tweak that I would also add in is keep yourself current and up to date. Not just in a planning, in a energy sense, but look at things like planning and licensing and regulations that affect investors. Now, on the 1st of September 2020, new planning laws came out where you can add up to 2 floors onto your existing property. Now, I've got some videos in the top corner here for you to watch with regards to adding 2 floors on, and they come under Schedule 2 Class AA or Schedule 20 Class AA and AB for commercial and AC and AD for residential. So a couple of different ones to consider and look at. But also a really great new planning permission that came out, another permitted development right, is that of you could demolish your building and rebuild it. And you don't need a planning permission. It's a permitted development. It does require a prior approval embedded in it, but you can demolish it, build yourself a better, more energy efficient building and add a couple of extra floors on without going to a planning permission. So it's worth keeping technically up to date and monitoring that portfolio once a year just to see where you can squeeze some more out. Could be, as I mentioned in a previous video, you can build 8 meters back into the garden under permitted development. Have you done that? Have you maxed out? Is it worth the cost of building? Because we covered that in one of our very early videos. In Newcastle, it might not be worth building 8 meters out, but in central London, building 8 meters, the costs that you'd add to the property would significantly outweigh it. So with all of these things, it's worth considering, are you maxing out on the asset based on current permitted development rights. And also take a note of ones that will expire, because there's a series of them in commercial property that expire on the 31st July 2021. Don't miss out. So, David, we've been going over 20 minutes now, and I think it's the end of today's show. So, thank you very much for all of that input on property cycles, pound cost averaging. I mean, I've learned so much. I think David's learnt a little bit there in terms of portfolio analysis and benchmarking with other landlords. But if you've loved what we do, hit the like, hit the share, hit the subscribe. Drop your comments in the box below. David, anything you'd like to add before we say goodbye?
Just that I'm raring to go on all the stuff we've discussed today, and I can't wait for the next one.
Perfect. Well, on that note, it's goodbye from me, Andrew Roberts.
And goodbye from me, David Clouter, and thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you next week.